Hello, and welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of The Star Beast by Robert Heinlein. Johnny has just realized that his friend Lummox, the Star Beast, can't be hunted down like any rabid dog because not only can Lummox talk, Lummox now has hands. Chapter 11. It's Too Late, Johnny. Mind your airspeed, she cautioned. Do you know the old one about the man whose lawyer assured him they could not put him in jail for that? What was that? Never mind. His client answered, But, counselor, I'm speaking from jail. The point is, the Cygnus decision is just theory. We've got to keep Lummox out of sight until we can get the court to change its mind. I see. I guess you're right. I'm always right, Betty admitted with dignity. Johnny, I'm dying of thirst. Thinking is dry work. Did you bring any water up from the creek? No, I didn't. Got a bucket? Yeah, somewhere. He felt in his pockets, found it, and pulled it out. He stopped to blow it up to a semi-rigidity, then said, I'll fetch it. No, give it to me. I want to stretch my legs. Wear flyers. Don't teach your grandmother. She took it and went downhill, keeping to the trees until she reached the bank. Johnny watched her slim figure catching shafts of cathedral light among the pines and thought how pretty she was. Very nearly as good a head on her as a man, and pretty to boot. Aside from being bossy the way females always were, Slugger was all right. She came back carrying the plastic bucket carefully. Help yourself, she offered. Go ahead. I drank from the creek. All right. He drank deeply. You know, Betty, if you weren't knock-kneed, you'd be pretty good-looking. Who's knock-kneed? And there's always your face, of course, he went on pleasantly. Aside from those two shortcomings, you're not— He did not finish. She dived and hit him low. The water went all down his front and partly on her. The scuffle continued until he got her right arm locked up behind, holding her helpless. Say pretty, please, he advised. Darn you, Johnny Stewart, pretty, please. With sugar on it? With sugar, and spit too. Let me up. All right. He got to his feet. She rolled to a sitting position, looked up at him, and laughed. They were both dirty, scratched, and somewhat bruised, and they both felt very fine indeed. Lummox had watched the mock fight with interest, but no alarm, since Johnny and Betty could never really be mad at each other. He commented, Johnny's all wet. He certainly is, Lummy, more ways than one. She looked him over. If I had 2 clothespins, I'd hang you on a tree, by your ears, of course. We'll be dry in 5 minutes a day like this. I'm not wet, not through a flying suit, but you look like a dunked cat. I don't mind. He lay down, found a pine needle, and bit it off. Slugger, this is a swell place. I wish I didn't have to go up to the mine. Tell you what. After we get this mess straightened out, and before we start school, we'll come back up here and camp a few days. We'll bring Lummox, too, won't we, Lummy? Sure, agreed Lummox. Catch things, throw rocks, fun. John Thomas looked at her reprovingly. And get me talked about all over town, no thanks. Don't be prissy. We're here now, aren't we? This is an emergency. You and your nice reputation. Well, somebody ought to watch such things. Mum says that boys had to start worrying when girls quit. She says things used to be different. Of course they were, and they will be again. They run the whole program over and over again. She looked thoughtfully. But, Johnny, you pay much too much attention to what your mother says. I suppose so, he admitted. You'd better break yourself of it, otherwise no girl is going to take a chance on marrying you. He grinned. That's my insurance policy. She dropped her eyes and blushed. I wasn't speaking of myself. I don't want you. I'm just taking care of you for practice. He decided not to pursue that angle. Honestly, he said, a person gets in the habit of behaving a certain way, and it's hard to stop. For instance, I've got an aunt, my Aunt Tessie. Remember her? Who believes in astrology. No, she doesn't. Surest thing. She doesn't look nutty, does she? But she is, and it's embarrassing because she just will talk about it, and Mother insists I have to be polite. If I could just tell her that she has holes in her head, it wouldn't matter. But oh no, I have to listen to her rave and pretend she's a sane, polite, responsible adult when she can't count above 10 without an abacus. An abacus? You know, a slipstick with beads. I said abacus because there isn't a prayer she could ever learn to read a slipstick. She likes being a lame brain, and I have to cater to it. Don't do it, Betty said suddenly. Pay no attention to what your mother says. Slugger, you are a subversive influence. Sorry, Johnny, she answered mildly, then added, Did I ever tell you why I divorced my parents? No, you never did. That's your business. So it is. But I think I'll tell you. You might understand me better now. Bend down. She grabbed him by an ear and whispered into it. As John Thomas listened, he took on an expression of extreme surprise. Not really. Fact. They didn't contest it, so I never had to tell anyone, but that's why. I don't see why you put up with it. I didn't. I stood up in court and divorced them and got a professional guardian who doesn't have nutty ideas. But look, Johnny, I didn't bare my soul just to make your chin drop. Heredity isn't everything. I'm myself, an individual. You aren't your parents. You're not your father. You are not your mother. But you are a little late in realizing it. She sat up straight. So be yourself, knothead, and have the courage to make your own mess of your life. Don't imitate somebody else's mess. Slugger, when you talk that stuff, you make it sound rational. That's because I'm always rational. How well fixed are you for groceries? I'm hungry. You're as bad as Lummox. The grub sack is over there. Lunch? Inquired Lummox, hearing his name. Betty, I don't want him tearing down trees, not in daylight. How long will it take them to track me down? I wouldn't count on over 3 days, big as this place is. Well, I'll hold back food for 5, just in case. He selected a dozen canned rations and gave them to Lummox. He did not open them, as Lummox rather liked having the packages suddenly become hot when he bit into them. He finished them off before Betty had opened their own lunches. After they ate, Johnny started to bring up the subject again. Betty, do you really think that... He broke off suddenly. Hear anything? She listened, then nodded solemnly. How fast? Not over 200. He nodded. Then they are scanning. Lummox, don't move a muscle. I won't, Johnny. Why not move a muscle? Do it. Don't get excited, Betty advised. They are probably just laying out their search pattern. Chances are they couldn't identify us either in the scope or visually with these trees to break up the image. But she looked worried. I wish Lummy were already in the mine tunnel, though. If anyone is smart enough to run a selective scan straight down the road while we're on it tonight, well, we've had it. John Thomas was not really listening. He was leaning forward, cupping his ears with both hands. Hush, he whispered. Betty, they're coming back. Don't panic. It's probably the other leg of the search pattern. But even as she said it, she knew she was wrong. The sound came over them, hovered, and dropped in pitch. They looked up, but the denseness of the forest and the altitude of the craft kept them from seeing it. Suddenly there was a light so bright that it made the sharp sunlight seem dusky when it passed. Betty gulped. What was that? Ultra-flash photo, he answered soberly. They're checking what they picked up on the scope. The sound above them squealed higher, then dropped. The eye-burning flash occurred again. Stereoed it, Johnny announced solemnly. They'll really see us now if they only suspected before. Johnny, we've got to get Lummox out of here. How? Take him up the road and let them pinpoint him with bombs? No, kid, our only hope is that they decide he's a big boulder. I'm glad I made him stay tucked in. He added, we mustn't move either. They may go away. Even that outside hope passed. One after another, 4 more ships were heard. Johnny ticked them off. That one has taken the station to the south. The third one was north, I think. Now they'll cover to the west, a pinwheel guard. They've got us boxed, Slugger. She looked at him, her face dead white. What do we do, Johnny? Huh? Why not? No, Betty, look. You duck down through the trees to the creek. Take your flight harness with you. Then follow the stream a good distance and take to the air. Keep low until you get out from under their umbrella. They'll let you go. They don't want you. And what will you be doing? Me? I stay here. And so do I. Johnny said fretfully, Don't make any trouble, Slugger. You'll just be in the way. What do you think you can do? You don't even have a gun. I have this, John Thomas answered grimly, touching his sheath knife, and Lummox can throw rocks. She stared at him, then laughed wildly. What? Rocks indeed! Oh, Johnny! They're not going to take us without a fight. Now will you get out of here fast and quit being a nuisance? No. Look, Slugger, there isn't time to argue. You get clear and fast. I stay with Lummox. That's my privilege. He's mine. She burst into tears. And you're mine, you big stupid oaf! He tried to answer her and could not. His face began to break in the spasmodic movements of a man trying to control tears. Lummox stirred uneasily. What's the matter, Johnny? He piped. Huh? John Thomas replied in a choked voice. Nothing. He reached up and patted his friend. Nothing at all, old fellow. Johnny's here. It's all right. All right, Johnny. Yes, Betty agreed faintly. It's all right, Lummy. She added in a low voice to John Thomas, It'll be quick, won't it, Johnny? We won't feel it? I guess so. Hey, none of that. In just 1/2 second, I'm going to punch you right on the button and dump you off the bank. That ought to protect you from the blast. She shook her head slowly, without anger or fear. It's too late, Johnny. You know it. Don't scold me. Just hold my hand. But... He stopped. Hear that? More of them. Yeah, they're probably building an octagon to make sure we don't get out. A sudden thunderclap spared her the need to answer. It was followed by the squeal of a hovering ship. This time they could see it less than 1,000 feet over their heads. Then an iron voice rumbled out of the sky. Stewart! John Stewart! Come out in the open! Johnny took out his sheath knife, threw back his head, and shouted, Come and get me! Betty looked up at him, her face shining, and patted his sleeve. Tell him, Johnny, she whispered. That's my Johnny. The man behind the giant voice seemed to have a directional mic trained on them. He was answered, We don't want you, and we don't want to hurt anybody. Give up and come out. He threw one word defiance and added, We aren't coming out. The thundering voice went on, Final warning, John Stewart. Come out with your hands empty. We'll send a ship down for you. John Thomas shouted back, Send it down and we'll wreck it. He added hoarsely to Lummox, Got some rocks, Lummy? Huh? Sure. Now, Johnny? Not yet. I'll tell you. The voice remained silent. No ship came down to them. Instead, a ship other than the command ship dropped swiftly, squatted 100 feet above the pines and about the same distance from them laterally. It started a slow circle around them, almost a crawl. Immediately there was a rending sound, then a crash as a forest giant toppled to the ground. Another followed at once. Like a great invisible hand, a drag field from the ship knocked over trees and swept them aside. Slowly it cut a wide fire break around them. Why are they doing that? Betty whispered. It's a forestry service ship. They're cutting us off. But why? Why don't they just do it and get it over with? She began to shake. He put an arm around her. I don't know, Slugger. They're driving. The ship closed the circle, then faced them and seemed to settle back on its haunches. With the delicate care of a dentist pulling a tooth, the operator reached in, selected one tree, plucked it out of the ground, and tossed it aside. He picked another, and still another. Gradually, a wide path was being cut through the timber to the spot where they waited. And there was nothing they could do but wait. The ranger's ship removed the last tree that shielded them. The tractor field brushed them as he claimed it, making them stagger and causing Lummox to squeal with terror. John Thomas recovered himself and slapped the beast's side. Steady, boy, Johnny's here. He thought about having them retreat back from the clearing now in front of them, but there seemed no use in it. The logging ship lay off. An attack ship moved in. It dropped suddenly and touched the ground at the end of the corridor. Johnny gulped and said, Now, Lummox, anything that comes out of that ship, see if you can hit it. You bet, Johnny. Lummox reached with both hands for ammunition. But he never picked up the rocks. John Thomas felt as if he had been dumped into wet concrete up to his chest. Betty gasped and Lummox squealed. Then he piped, Johnny, the rocks are stuck. John Thomas labored to speak. It's all right, boy. Don't struggle. Just hold still. Betty, you all right? Can't breathe, she gasped. Don't fight it. They've got us. 8 figures poured out of the door of the ship. They looked not human, being covered head to foot with heavy metal mesh. Each wore a helmet resembling a fencer's mask and carried a backpack with a field anti-generator in it. They trotted confidently in open double file toward the passage through the trees. As they struck the field, they slowed slightly, sparks flew, and a violet nimbus formed around each, but on they came. The second 4 were carrying a large metal net cylinder, high as a man and of equal width. They balanced it easily up in the air. The man in the lead called out, "Swing wide of the beast. We'll catch the kids out first, then dispose of him." He sounded quite cheerful. The squad came up to the odd group of 3, cutting around them without passing close to Lummox. "Easy, catch them both," the leader called out. The barrel-like cage was lowered over Betty and John Thomas, setting slowly until the man giving orders reached inside and flipped a switch, whereupon it struck sparks and dropped to the ground. He gave them a red-faced grin. "Feels good to get out of the molasses, doesn't it?" Johnny glared at him with his chin quivering and replied insultingly while he tried to rub cramps out of his leg muscles. "Now, now," the officer answered mildly. "No good to feel that way. You made us do it." He glanced up at Lummox. "Good grief, he is a big beast, isn't he? I'd hate to meet him in a dark alley without weapons." Johnny found that tears were streaming down his face and that he could not stop them. "Go ahead," he cried, his voice misbehaving. "Get it over with." "Eh?" "He never meant any harm. Kill him quickly. Don't play cat and mouse with him." He broke down and sobbed, covering his face with his hands. Betty put her hands on his shoulders and sobbed with him. The officer looked distressed. "What are you talking about, son? We aren't here to hurt him. We have orders to bring him in without a scratch on him, even if we lost men in the process. Craziest orders I ever had to carry out." Chapter 12. Concerning Pidgey-Widgey. Mr. Kiku was feeling good. Breakfast was not burning a lump in his middle. He felt no need to shop in his pill drawer, not even a temptation to get out his real estate folders. The triangular conference was going well, and the Martian delegates were beginning to talk sense. Ignoring the various amber lights on his desk, he began singing, "Frankie and Johnny were lovers." He had a fair baritone and no sense of pitch. Best of all, that silly, confused Froschian affair was almost over, and no bones broken. Good old Doc Stamel seemed to think there was an outside chance of establishing diplomatic relations, so delighted the Froschii had been at recovering their missing Froschia. With a race as powerful as the Froschii, diplomatic relations were essential. They must be allies, though that might take a while. Perhaps not too long, he decided. They certainly did nip-ups at the sight of Lummox, almost idolatrous. Looking back, the things that had confused them were obvious. Who would have guessed that a creature half as big as a house and over a century old was a baby? Or that this race attained hands only when old enough to use them? For that matter, why was this Froschia so much bigger than its co-racials? Its size had misled Greenberg and himself as much as anything. Interesting point. He'd have the xenologists look into it. No matter. By now Lummox was on her way to the Froschian ship. No fuss, no ceremony, no publicity, and the danger was over. Could they actually have volatilized Terra? Just as well not to have found out. All's well that ends well. He went back to singing. He was still singing when the urgent light began jittering, and he delivered the last few bars into Greenberg's face. "Just as true as the stars above," he added. "Sergei, can you sing tenor?" "Why should you care, boss? That wasn't a tune." "You're just jealous. What do you want, son? See them off okay?" Boss, there's a slight hitch. I've got Dr. Stamel with me. Can we see you?" "What is it?" "Let's wait until we're alone. One of the conference rooms." "Come into the office," Mr. Kiku said grimly. He switched off, opened a drawer, selected a pill, and took it. Greenberg and the Medusoid came in at once. Greenberg flopped down in a chair as if exhausted, pulled out a cigarette, felt in his pockets, then put it away. Mr. Kiku greeted Dr. Ftamel formally, then said to Greenberg, "Well?" "Lummox didn't leave." "Eh?" "Lummox refused to leave. The other Roshii are boiling like ants. I've kept the barricades up and that part of the spaceport around their landing craft blocked off. We've got to do something." "Why? This development is startling, but I fail to see that it's our responsibility. Why the refusal to embark?" "Well," Greenberg looked helplessly at Ftamel. The Rargelian said smoothly, "Permit me to explain, sir. The Roshia refuses to go abroad without her pet." "Pet?" "The kid, boss. John Thomas Stewart." "Exactly," agreed Ftamel. "The Roshia states that she has been raising John Thomases for a long time, and she refuses to go home unless she can take her John Thomas with her. She was quite imperious about it." "I see," agreed Kiku. "To put it in more usual language, the boy and the Roshia are attached to each other. That's not surprising. They grew up together. But Lummox will have to put up with the separation just as John Thomas Stewart had to. As I recall, he made a bit of fuss. We told him to shut up and shipped him home. That's what the Roshia must do. Tell her to shut up, force her if necessary into the landing craft, and take her along. That's what they came here for." The Rargelian answered, "Permit me to say, sir, that putting it into more usual language, you have missed the meaning. I have been discussing it with her in her own tongue." "Eh? Has she learned so quickly?" "She has long known it. The Roshii, Mr. Undersecretary, know their own language almost from the shell. One may speculate that this use of language almost on the instinctive level is one reason, perhaps the reason, why they find other languages difficult and never learn to use them well. The Roshia speaks your language hardly as well as one of your 4-year-old children, though I understand that she began acquiring it one of your generations ago. But in her own language she is scathingly fluent. So I learned, much to my sorrow." "So, well, let her talk. Words can't hurt us." "She has talked. She has given orders to the commander of the expedition to recover her pet at once. Otherwise, she states, she will remain here and continue raising John Thomases." "And," Greenberg added, "the commander has handed us an ultimatum to produce John Thomas Stewart at once or else." "Or else meaning what I think it means," Kiku answered slowly. "The works," Greenberg said simply. "Now that I've seen their ground craft, I'm not sure but what they can." "You must understand, sir," Ftamel added earnestly, "that the commander is as distressed as you are, but he must attempt to carry out the wishes of the Roshia. This mating was planned more than 2,000 of your years ago. They will not give it up lightly. He cannot allow her to remain, nor can he force her to leave. He is very much upset." "Aren't we all?" Mr. Kiku took 2 more pills. "Dr. Ftamel, I have a message for your principals. Please convey it exactly." "I shall, sir." "Please tell them that their ultimatum is rejected with contempt." "Please, sir, I beg of you, attend me." Tell them that and do not soften it. Tell them that we tried in every way to help them, that we succeeded, and that they have answered kindness with threats. Tell them that their behavior is unworthy of civilized people, and that the invitation to join the community of civilizations is withdrawn. Tell them that I spit in their faces, find an idiom of equal strength. Tell them that free men may die, but they are never bullied. Greenberg was grinning widely and clasping both hands in the ancient sign of approval. Dr. Ftamel seemed to grow pale under his outer chiton. "Sir," he said, "I greatly regret being required to deliver this message." Kiku smiled icily. "Deliver it as given. But before you do, find opportunity to speak to the Roshia Lummox. You can do so?" "Most assuredly, sir." Tell her that the commander of the expedition, in his zeal, seems bent on killing the human John Thomas Stewart. See that she understands what is threatened." The Rargelian arranged his mouth in a broad smile. "Forgive me, sir. I underestimated you. Both messages will be delivered in the proper order. That is all." "Your good health, sir." The Rargelian turned to Greenberg, put a loose-jointed arm around his shoulder. "My brother Sergei, we have already found our way together out of one tight maze. Now, with the help of your spiritual father, we shall find our way out of another, eh?" "Right, Doc." Damel left. Kiku turned to Greenberg and said, "Get the Stewart boy here. Get him at once, yourself, personally. Bring his mother, too. He's underage, isn't he?" "Yes, boss. What's the plan? You aren't going to turn him over to them after that wonderful kick in the teeth you handed them?" "Of course I am, but on my own terms. I don't intend to let those animated pool tables think they can push us around. We'll use this to get what we want. Now get going. I'm gone." And we'll find out how you continue to threaten animated pool tables and how we get John Thomas and Lummox back together next time.